Hey guys, it's BenTbeyondrepair. I know some of you are going to say that I'm a little bit crazy for thinking this, but I actually think that FlyQuest is one of the best teams that the West has had in years, and definitely for NA, one of the best teams that we've had in a very, very, very long time. And it's really unfortunate because I think that FlyQuest is actually super far ahead of their time, literally years ahead when it comes to how they're drafting and the way that that their players look at the game and their itemization and a lot of these other aspects of the game are really, really good. And I think that FlyQuest is has really high potential. But the issue is, and where it gets so depressing, is they make the most basic, like introductory mistakes in the beginning of the game, especially because their comps do tend to scale really well because of their good drafting. And so they end up making these just crazy errors in the early game that really cost them. And we're just going to go through the Worlds games that they've played so far and take a look. I hope that they fix these before their series against Gen G in the quarterfinals, but I'm not so optimistic. So we'll see. It's just depressing because, NA hasn't produced a good team in a very, very long time. Now, that's what's so frustrating about it is why are we making these basic errors? I really feel like if FlyQuest cleaned these things up, they would actually be competing for, world championship spot. I really do believe that they're probably if you just look at it, right, they're probably the best Western team that there is right now. I mean, it's definitely between them and G2. Unfortunately, they didn't get to play, but I would say that FlyQuest, from what I've seen, is the best Western team right now. And then obviously you've got the Chinese and the Korean teams. So maybe FlyQuest is somewhere between the ninth best team in the world. And depending on, if you think they're better than some of the bottom tier Chinese and Korean teams, then maybe FlyQuest is sitting somewhere at like the, ninth, eighth, seventh, sixth best team in the world. And, any given Sunday, basically, a team that happens to be even like the sixth or the seventh best team in the world. It's a little bit difficult in a best of five format, but does have a decent chance at actually, just outright winning the thing if they have, a good run. And so it's kind of depressing because they could push themselves even higher if they cleaned up these mistakes. And so it feels like so much lost potential and talent. And the advantages that they have in draft in their way that they're looking at the meta are not going to last forever. They're very innovative, but the problem with being an innovative team is that other teams in other regions will eventually just start picking up what you're doing if what you're doing is actually that good. And you won't stay years ahead of those other teams forever, especially if a team that doesn't make these errors starts adopting the way that you're drafting and the champions that you believe to be good in the meta. So we've obviously seen a lot of innovative picks across the board, but I would say especially from FlyQuest, the Ivern and the Amumu, the Nunu in the jungle, among others. So let's just get into the gameplay and see what we've got. We're just watching some highlight videos, so that it'll go by a little bit quicker and we can get the idea. There will be plenty of errors, even in just watching the highlight videos, but we may lose a little bit of context. So first off, let's take a look at the situation here and try to figure out what's going on. So we've got a situation here where we have a Kalista Leona versus a Jhin Poppy. Kalista Leona is one of the strongest bot lanes in the game, bar none, right? Kalista is like very, very strong in lane. A lot of damage. The Rend gives her so much kill potential in an all-in situation. She's essentially like Draven. I know a lot of players don't view it that way, maybe coming from solo queue because Kalista isn't played as much in solo queue, but trust me, Kalista is right up there with Draven as one of the most lane dominant AD carry champions in the game. And then you don't really get any better champion than Leona, and Leona happens to be a champion that Busio seems really comfortable playing, which makes sense because it's a very common, popular, engaged support champion. And so we have this matchup, and yet FlyQuest have actually sent their bot lane top lane and initiated a lane swap. And this doesn't really make sense because if you look at the reason why a lot of good teams are initiating these lane swaps at Worlds, it's because they are having a melee support playing versus a ranged support, and they want to prevent their melee support from having to face that ranged support early on in the matchup. But in this case, FlyQuest actually has a winning bot lane matchup because they outdrafted their with the bot lane picks. So why would you opt into lane swapping here? It just doesn't make sense. You want to face the Jhin and the Poppy and be able to kill them straight up 2v2, or at least threaten that, or at least get a CS lead and leverage your advantage. Doing this, and this is really the only reason why I believe that they did this, initiating this lane swap can have other benefits, and one of the benefits is that with Ivern, you can actually, mark your camps and then move down and protect this dive on the Scion, because Ivern can then go back and collect his camps in very, very short amount of time, whereas a normal jungler would actually have to be on those camps if he was wanting to take those at that time. And so I think the only reason why they went for this swap is because when they pick Ivern, they expect to just lane swap in a situation where they're playing Ivern. But I don't think that you always want to do that just because Ivern has that advantage. And so, we'll see how this situation plays out. So Bwipo gets eat into the wall by Poppy, probably didn't need to pin himself against the wall like that, considering Inspired was coming to bail him out and help him. He probably should have just backed up, but instead of behind his turret and against the wall, he should have been more in line with the middle of the lane so he couldn't get pinned against the wall. Unfortunately, I think I've gotten caught by it as people are starting to play more Poppy support. I think that he just got caught a little bit off guard by the fact that Poppy would be able to E him into the wall there. It's just one of these small mistakes that they make so often in the early game that kind of add up to a massive disadvantage. So, well, it's not the end of the world because Ivern's going to be able to pick up those camps for free because he marked them, like we said. Ivern has still committed time to come down here to this play instead of, marking his other camps or doing other things, looking for play somewhere else. And so obviously this is a bit of a failing, and I don't really know why we were going for the lane swap here. Now, Sion is going to get to pick up a little bit of the CS because it is Sion and he has that passive. Another reason why they probably opted for the lane swap is they probably like Sion's ability, even if the dive goes poorly, for him to pick up CS in this situation. But he's not going to be able to pick up all of these minions. I mean, look at how massive this minion wave is, including a cannon minion, so he's just not going to get all of these minions. So now we have a situation occurring here where they've come back into lane much later, and Bwipo has found a really nice in onto the Gnar, and it looks like he straight up just has enough damage to kill Gnar here, but decides to back off. And I don't really understand why he would do this, because especially with Sion passive here, you definitely just take plate, kill Gnar, and get all these minions. And so I don't really understand why he just decided to wait so long and then walk away from the situation. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think that, trading 1-for-1 there is something that looks bad to the audience, but is actually just the correct play, and we just don't go for it, I think, because it's kind of a KDA play. I don't know. Maybe they're worried about where the jungler is or something like that. If we go back and look, no, they have full vision on Vi here. Ivern's spotting Vi right now. So that's not the case. So I don't know why you wouldn't want to trade that there, because Gnar is going to lose this entire minion wave and you're going to get the plate anyways, and the kill's pretty guaranteed with your passive. So I would say that definitely trading 1-for-1 here and denying Gnar all of these minions. I mean, look at this situation, right? This is actually where he was on top of Gnar. I mean, look at how many minions Gnar would have been denied if he just keeps going in here. Oops. I mean, look at this, right? He's walking away now. Gnar's at 100 HP, there's a full minion wave and a half, and you definitely just kill Gnar here, get a turret plate 100% of the time. So I feel like this is just weird. It looks like we're, again, just trying to make ourselves look good instead of going for maybe the play that's optimal in terms of gold, which just feels super weird to me. So now we have another weird situation here, which is actually a big mistake by Gigabyte Marines. But this video is about FlyQuest, but I do have to point this out. Why would Gigabyte Marines, we just talked about this bot lane matchup, why would Gigabyte Marines swap Poppy and Jhin back into Kalista Leona? Especially given the fact that Kalista Leona are, I believe, ahead of them. Yeah, we can see here Leona's level 5, Poppy's level 4, Kalista's level 6, Jhin is level 5. You know, why are we swapping back into this matchup? Why wouldn't they just want to continue to play bot? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me either, because Gam is essentially opting into this bad matchup. Now, Inspired here ends up finishing the Void Grubs, and there's one thing that I really, really can't stand right now about League of Legends, and that's an unwillingness to trade objectives on the opposite side of the map. So for whatever reason here, Inspired thinks that he has time to walk all the way from the Void Grubs down to maybe potentially contest the dragon or steal the dragon away or something like that, when instead blue buff is spawning, enemy blue buff is spawning, their bot lane is in a precarious situation where they're under turret. And I honestly think without even, because the dive will be close and it will depend on how it gets played out. But I think that you can definitely at least threaten a dive here if you're Inspired by just walking and showing behind them and maybe forcing them to either try to start fighting your bot lane, which is advantageous for your bot lane, or forcing them to walk off of the minion wave and give up this incoming minion wave, you know, or something. Or, you know, or again, maybe steal the blue buff. I think maybe he does steal the blue buff, actually. Oh yeah, he did take the blue buff because the blue buff's gone and he has it here. But you can see just a few seconds later, he's actually just taken the blue buff and then walked all the way down straight towards the dragon. Well, he took the blue buff. That's not that bad. And then again, this is the result of Gam deciding to swap back into this matchup. They actually just die 2v2 here, you know, pretty much entirely because they're under-leveled. Otherwise, Busio would have just died for sure. So here we have this very, very basic situation where we see Rel use the vision cone. We're looking at the minimap right here. We see Rel use the vision cone. Right? She breaks the vision cone to spot them doing the dragon. So we know Rel is exactly right here. And yet, for some reason, we can see from the minimap, the Syndra is not positioning up, she's positioning down in the lane. And not only is she positioning down, but she's actually walking up into Sylas here to throw abilities at him and to continue to farm. And Sylas is able to walk straight into melee range of the Syndra here. So even if, let's say, Rel wasn't here, and we somehow didn't know Rel was here, which we did, there's no reason why Quad should allow Sylas to get on top of him so easily. This is already a misplay if he was just taking a trade in lane, because he shouldn't space so poorly that Sylas can get on top of him so easily like this and still have abilities left over. And so there's just no world in which we should ever be dying here when we literally saw the Rel pop the vision cone, the Scryer's Bloom, and then our teammates are Mia pinging the vision plant and where Rel is, and then we walk up, allow Sylas to get into melee range of us, walk forward while we're potentially getting ganked. It's just completely unacceptable. It just doesn't make any sense. It's just these minor errors like this that are literally like solo queue level errors happening in their important games at Worlds that are costing them so much, because I'm telling you that FlyQuest is legitimately a top like 7 team in the world or something right now, like maybe 9th is like the lowest I would put them. So if FlyQuest is like a 7th place team, maybe even higher, right? If they did not make these errors, right? If they did not make these errors, then they would actually legitimately be like a Worlds contender, right, to win the championship. And so it's so frustrating when NA has not had a team that's been really competitive and quite good at Worlds, especially that's playing their own style with good Western players. We haven't seen it in so long, literally since the early days of League, and that almost doesn't even count because it was literally just that NA had existed for longer as a region and Korea wasn't really, quite there yet. And even then, right, Korea was in the finals in season 2, and NA was not. Granted, Azubu Frost cheated against TSM. That's a whole nother thing back in season 2. But listen, the point is that there's no reason, absolutely no reason, why this situation should be occurring where we're making all of these small basic mistakes. Now look at this, right? Bwipo knows he can't walk up to the wave here. He knows it. That's why he's sitting back, trying to stay in XP range, but not farming the minions. He knows he can't walk up here. And yet, he puts himself in a situation where very easily, had Moham not just missed his flash Q, Bwipo had a nice sidestep here, but frankly, Moham missed his flash Q. If Bwipo had, just gotten Q'd right here, he would just die. Right, he's not even in a spot where, if they position correctly, they're not even going to get hit by the turret because of how far back he's walked. So it's really, really sad because this is already an error that could have very easily killed him had Moham played just a little bit better mechanically. And now he pops Ghost because Busio is on the way to help him. It's just a Leona, and it's the only person who's here. He pops Ghost and face checks the bush. At best, think about this, at best, this was going to be a 2v3. Let's say, we didn't know this, that Vi was coming here, right? Even if you don't know that Vi is here, which you should assume she's here if you don't have information. But even if we don't know that Vi is here, just assume she's not here for some reason, right? This is still a 2v3, right? Not under our tower because it's moving away from our tower because we're walking into our jungle at them. With a level 4 Leona versus a level 6 Yone, level 5 Rel and a level 4 Smolder. So I don't know in what world we're ghosting in here on Darius and just killing ourselves. With Vi missing, by the way. So then we come back to the same situation. Now Darius has gone bot to pick up the wave, and FlyQuest has sent their bot lane to top. Same situation again. We have the collapse coming in. I don't know why we don't necessarily have Hawkshot or something to even spot this out. This is one of the most common plays, and it just happened to Darius to sit in this bush or the equivalent bush in bot lane. And, if you have a lot of control here and you're taking a turret with a lot of people, you control this bush and you can prevent them walking into range of their turret. And if you can fight them, in between the turret here, they're not even getting help from their turret and you're still able to zone them off of the wave. If they walk up to the turret, you can potentially dive them if you're strong enough to dive them, which most of the time you are, especially if you've got a lot of people here and are coordinated and competitive. And even if you feel like you can't dive them, you can kind of jail them and keep them stuck under the turret here by preventing them from ever being able to leave or escape until you bring up the people in order to dive them. So you can kind of keep them trapped. So right here, Busio and Masu get separated, and it doesn't really make sense because is Leona going to farm this wave? Does Leona really need the XP if the Ashe isn't going to be able to get it? Is it worth getting split up and dove as opposed to just walking with the Ashe? Why are they not playing together here? Why are they allowing themselves to be split up by walking up here, kind of solo as the Leona and getting split apart? So they do end up trading 1-for-1. And of course, Ashe gets to walk up and farm the wave since it's Leona that died, not the Ashe. So they're not really denying a whole lot to Ashe once this happens. So it's not terrible. But then we see here, okay, Ashe just gets dove actually when she tries to pick up the next wave. So again, you've just had a series of events in this game versus DK where we've had 4 deaths in this game, right? The Syndra dying to a literally, like, we know where Rel is, coming from the bot side of mid, breaking the the Scryer's Bloom, revealing her location, and somehow Quad is still dying to that play. Bwipo running and face checking a bush in a 3v2 at best, which turns out to be a 4v2 because they didn't know where Lucid was. And then we have FlyQuest sending their bot lane with no support, with no help from the jungle or from top lane or anybody. We're sending them up to a turret that they're going to not be able to walk up and catch the wave in, because of the situation that Bwipo created, which, by the way, even leading up to the dive onto Bwipo, or not really the dive onto Bwipo, into Bwipo running in like this, you can kind of see it right here. You see on the mini-map that Darius and Yone are trading heavily right here, even though they've got to know that Vi is on... They're even pinging it, right? Vi is on the Void Grubs right now. Rel, they're even pinging the route that Rel is taking through this blue control ward. And Leona knows that this is happening because Leona is, like, running out of base straight. Actually, he's going mid. Why is he going mid? He's taking too long to recognize it, but so I wouldn't say he's going straight to top lane, but he does recognize that he has to go to top lane. Wait, they see Moham here. Wait, oh, it's even worse. So there's multiple things happening here. One, why, when you have Rel moving towards you and we're pinging it, when you have Vi on the Void Grubs and you know that you're weak side and that their team has a bunch of people on that map, on that side of the map, why would you trade that heavily with Yone and lose half of your HP as Darius here? That's part of what set him up for this dive and for this play to be so bad in the first place. We see Moham clear this ward, and so Bwipo actually knows that Moham is sitting here in this bush. So if he knows he's sitting here in this bush, why would he ever walk up like this? I thought I at least gave him the benefit of the doubt that he just didn't know Moham was here. Especially since obviously he went in and didn't know Lucid was here. So this just seems like a complete lack of awareness. Also, we should know Lucid is here, right? Because Lucid just took Void Grubs. Like right here, he just finishes the Void Grubs. You get a global announcement that he's right here. I think Lucid is even like, I guess he's doing crab. It almost seemed like, I mean, maybe it's just because of the way he was doing crab, but it almost seemed like Lucid was willing to just about walk away here. But maybe that's reaching. I don't think that Lucid was actually, but it almost seems like you wouldn't even expect, like if you're playing versus a good team, I don't even think you expect the Darius to allow you to dive him like this. So it's just all really bad deaths. And then, so like, obviously, here, like we talked about, why are we not like hawk shotting into this bush? This just is a repeat play. We saw the same thing happening. We see, Silas has moved and has priority from mid lane. Like, we ought to know that this is happening. We ought to have hawkshot at some point in the 30 seconds or so it's taking us to walk all the way back from Fountain. You're telling me we weren't able to hawkshot or get any vision on this bush. And again, Masu knows that this is coming, and yet for some reason, right, Masu's backing off because they can't walk up for the wave, and Busio is deciding to go into the turret to try to outplay the dive. So why are they on a separate page from each other and splitting up? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, why is Busio so desperate to catch the XP here? And then again, like, it doesn't look that terrible because they trade 1-for-1. But then what happens, right? Now Masu's stuck up here, and they still have 3 people up here topside, and Masu's stuck farming this wave by himself, and so he just gets dove. And so now we've got 4 deaths, and the only kill that FlyQuest has managed to get is this one kill that Leona traded back on this dive, which was still a 2-for-1 hugely positive play, denying minion waves and taking plates for DK. So when we make these mistakes, this many basic mistakes in the early game, like just basic mistakes, like these are mistakes that honestly, I expect my teammates to like and me personally to not make these kind of mistakes in solo queue and like masters. So these are really basic, like solo queue level or like very, very basic competitive level mistakes that we should understand and not ever be making, or at least keeping them to a minimum, not having them snowball like 5 of these things happening in like 10 minutes to us. And then all of a sudden we've thrown away a game in an important series because, or in Swiss stage because of just this shenanigans and bad decisions. And so these things should just never happen. And as I said, what's crazy is that FlyQuest is actually still really good despite making all of these basic errors. As I said, they're probably a top 6 or 7 team in the world. So now if you think about it like that, imagine if FlyQuest was actually cleaning up these early mistakes. If they had good coaching that was pointing out these mistakes and cleaning these mistakes out of their gameplay, right? If they buffered all these mistakes out of their gameplay and they were playing with the next level read that they have on the meta, with the talent that they have in top lane and in jungle, and even in the other roles, like Quad and Masu have really done well and stepped up quite big. I didn't really think of Masu as like this really great, amazing AD carry player, or as, Quad being like one of the top mid laners in NA, but I truly believe, again, not just because of their results, but because of the way that they're playing the game, I truly believe that Masu in particular has really stepped up from being like, a little literal who to being like one of the best AD carries in the LCS right now. And it's just depressing to know that this team could be, maybe instead of a 6th or a 7th best team in the world, FlyQuest could legitimately be like maybe the 4th best team in the world. And then if you're like the 4th best team in the world, your chances of winning a world championship are like, they're there, they're like 10-15% or 20% or something like that, which is a hell of a lot more of a percentage chance of winning a world championship than NA has had since like back in like season 1 and season 2, which hardly count, right? So that's what's so depressing about watching these mistakes in this gameplay, is why are we not VOD reviewing and fixing these? Well, they're VOD reviewing, right? But why are we not catching and fixing these small mistakes that are happening over and over again, right? And it's game 1, it's game 2, it's game 3 of Swiss, it's game 4, it's game 5, it's the finals, it's the LCS playoffs. These kind of laning mistakes and early rotational mistakes and things like that are occurring in literally all of their games, right? I wanted to go back further, but I just think that, with me ranting and raving like this, it'll take too long, frankly. But it's just so depressing to watch a team like FlyQuest with so much potential just be held back by these little mistakes, because they could be a real contender. And Inspired's able to come and pick up the kill here, but they could be a real contender if they just cleaned up some of their gameplay here and prevented a lot of these mistakes from happening in the early game, because they, with their comps, they usually scale extremely well. And that's why they're able to get into these deficits against some of these, some of these really good teams that are outplaying them in the early game. And their champion picks, their read on the meta, their scaling comps are allowing them to kind of defy expectations, because they understand better than some of the Korean teams and Chinese teams do, in my opinion. They understand what value they can get out of some of these champions, and they're displaying it. And they're also playing champions that these Korean and Chinese teams are just not used to playing against, and they're having a decent amount of success with it. Okay, so then take a look at this play. Now this dive ends up being really close, and it's kind of hard to see exactly what's going on here, but Showmaker lives with literally 1 HP and ends up getting the kill back onto Inspired. And I think that it's just pretty obvious when somebody lives with a tiny sliver of an HP like this, that there's probably always something that you could have done to make this play work a little bit better. And look, usually when it's this close, it's just not that helpful to to pick on like the nitty gritty, tiny mechanical details of what a player did. I think that a player is going to play the way that they are when it comes to little details like this mechanically, and maybe they'll improve from this situation a tiny amount. But I think Bwipo might have autoed the turret right here. can kind of see. So it's really hard to see. And I'm actually not 100% sure, but there's probably something that can be done to get a little bit of extra damage in here. But I think right here, Bwipo E's, and then we can see this red bar on the turret here, and it looks an awful lot to me like Bwipo swings at the turret. Unfortunately, it's a little bit difficult. Oh, because we can't see Showmaker's HP bar, but we can see it here on the left. Yeah, it didn't tick down at all. So I'm pretty sure Bwipo E'd and then autoed the turret once here, right at the start of the fight. And so obviously Showmaker would have died, because he only lived with that one sliver of HP, less than 100 HP. So that auto attack here at the beginning would have made the difference, unfortunately, on this kill. But what's really more egregious than this play, actually, which is just kind of unfortunate that it doesn't work out. Like, I guess they just didn't realize that how difficult it would be to dive a Sylas with access to a Mumu ult. But, so obviously, had that auto not gone onto the turret, Showmaker would have just died here. He ticks down. And this is the other thing that's really important about that auto, even compared to another champion, but especially on Darius, it means you would have gotten your passive stacked quicker, which is going to give you, that bleed damage would have came in earlier, and you would have gotten extra damage on your other stuff when you went to use it if you had more stacks at that time, or if you had activated your passive. And so that would have been really massive in this fight. But this is what I think is really even more egregious, is if we back up here and look at the mini-map and look at what's happening on the bottom side of the map here, it's really crazy, because on the bottom side of the map, we can see that Leona and Syndra are actually pinging on my way on the Yone, like multiple times, like they want to go in on the Yone here. And it's really, really ridiculous, because again, one of the most basic macro principles when you're playing in competitive is this concept of the seesaw or the weak side, strong side. And obviously, if your team is going for a tower dive top lane, 2v1, whether that works or doesn't, if you've put two people in top lane and they only have one person, you simply cannot force onto somebody in bot lane or try to make two plays on opposite sides of the map at the same time. You can't possibly expect that to work out well for you. It's just bad fundamental League of Legends. I don't care that they see that Rel and Vi are a little bit delayed here. It's also very difficult to kill a champion like Yone. And so Leona and Syndra here, Quad and Busio, actually think for some reason when their jungler is diving top lane that now is a really good time to try to all in the level 11 Yone. And yes, Yone used his E forward and then ulted the Leona right here to stall her, but they were pinging that they intended to go in on Yone. And even if they decided, okay, we don't have enough time, they're coming from mid, and then tried to back off, because they were looking for that play, they walked too far up in bot lane, which is exactly what happened, and Yone was able to stall them here. Quad, you can see, is even walking forward to try to push Yone away from Leona, even after Leona is walking out and the Yone ult is over. He's still walking forward. So the mindset here was obviously just that they were looking to make some sort of aggressive trade play bot, but it doesn't make any sense because you can't be making a play top and bot at the same time. And since they were already behind in this game, now that they're failing a play top and they're failing a play bot, even if the play top was just off by that one auto attack or one little mistake or whatever it was, maybe we didn't, whatever the case may be, you just can't be looking for an aggressive play bottom here. It's just completely contrary to everything that we know about like basic macro in League of Legends. So this is just ridiculous. And then they end up getting double killed right here. And so now the game is pretty much just GG, because we've now made a lot of early game mistakes, and I mean a lot of early game mistakes. And so now we're down 5,000 gold, 6 grubs to 0, in this game. And I mean, what even happens here? So Bwipo comes. He gets TP'd on, actually. And with the 14-minute home guard because they're at 16 minutes here, Showmaker is actually just able to chase down Bwipo. Wow, that's rather unfortunate. I mean, in theory, this should never happen. Like in theory, you should know better, but I would have gotten caught by this too. This is really tough. But that's, you got to know better, I guess. Apparently that happens. I think that's crazy. I mean, that really comes down to, obviously, it's a little bit old now, but the home guards being active at 14 minutes for free on everybody meant that when he, Showmaker teleported back in here, he was actually just able to catch Darius, even though Bwipo left immediately once he saw the TP. And so now it's just a complete disaster, right? Because now Bwipo's died, Inspired died. So Showmaker essentially, more or less, off of this dive ends up getting a 2-for-0. And they get the 2-for-0 bot lane. Smolder, all the while, is free stacking, free farming in mid lane, taking a turret. This game's just over, right? And so you can see what I'm talking about. In this game, they don't even get a chance to use their their team comp, their unique champion picks, their itemization, the things that they are doing well as a team to compensate for the difference in skill between a really good Korean team like this and a Western team. They're making these mistakes, and I legitimately think that had they not made these mistakes versus DK, this is why I say it really depends, right? If these mistakes, which seem really obvious and like basic to fix, if FlyQuest fixed these mistakes, they could be a really, really good team, because while they're making these mistakes, DK is going to capitalize on these mistakes, and they're just not better than the LCK third seed. They're just going to get, ran every time by this team. But if they fix these mistakes, they might just be, I mean, it's hard to tell because this game just is over. But, they could even be, like I said, better than an LCK 4th seed or an LCK 3rd seed, or better than, Weibo or LNG, the Chinese 3rd or 4th seed. And yet, and even BLG, although they're looking like they're a little bit more back in form, BLG, who was coming in as the favorites to win Worlds, was really underperforming in the Swiss stage hard. Like, out of all of the 8 Korean and Chinese teams, Bilibili Gaming, BLG, which was basically, in my opinion, the favorite to win the World Championship, they were really faltering and dropping games to teams they really probably shouldn't have been dropping games to. They look like they're a little bit better now, but this is all to say that when Han1 Life and Genji are trading games and series back and forth with each other, when Bilibili, those would be like the 2 favorite Korean teams, right? Those would be the top 2 Korean teams. When SKT, who would normally be a favorite, is sitting, as the 4th seed coming in from Korea, and so they're obviously not looking maybe as good as they normally would, and they really weren't tested very much in the Swiss stage at all with the matches that they had to play to get through, and then the small number of matches that they played. When those are the Korean teams, right, if you can compete with Genji, you can compete for the World Championship. On the Chinese side, Weibo and LNG are not bad, but they're not like amazing teams. Like, FlyQuest could compete with those teams, especially if they didn't make dumb mistakes like this, because again, they're literally years ahead in draft and itemization, and their players are super smart with a lot of the ways that they play the game. But it almost seems like in a lot of these early game situations, they're just completely lost, or maybe they're so used to getting bailed out by their late game team comps that they're playing with in these scrims or whatever, and against some of these other easier teams that aren't punishing their mistakes, because again, they're not scrimming versus these really good Chinese and Korean teams. Maybe they're playing versus just a lower caliber of team in practice that's not punishing these type of mistakes that they're making, and so they think they're just the king of the world, and that they're doing really, really well, and they are doing really well, but not when it comes to these mistakes, and maybe they're just not being punished for them in NA in the way that they are, internationally. I'm sure that that's true. And so it's depressing, because then, again, you evaluate it and you look and you say, okay, well, if Weibo and LNG are like decent, LNG actually looks pretty good, but if Weibo and LNG are these like pretty decent, pretty good Chinese teams, but they're beatable, and T1 is like not at their best form. They're like not amazing. They're the 4th seed from LCK. DK maybe beatable, hard to see. It's like Billy is the number 1 seed from China, but they're faltering. It's like you can see how there's a world where FlyQuest is cleaning up some of these obvious basic mistakes with all of those other aspects that they're doing so well as a team in so many of these games. If they could just clean up these dumb mistakes, they could legitimately be competing, you see what I'm saying, for like a 4th or a 5th spot or something. And then you have real odds, even if you're not necessarily the best team on paper or you haven't proven it yet, there's still a chance that they end up maybe having a higher ceiling than we expect. Even if they do, if they do improve those things, maybe they end up actually being better than even I would expect. Or, maybe some of these other teams falter, or at least even if they're legitimately only the 4th best team or the 5th best team or the 6th best team, at least they have those decent odds of just happening to win, right? Because it's a competition and it's not a guarantee that anybody's going to win, on any given day. And so if they just give themselves that, 10-15% chance to win the world championship by cleaning up these mistakes, that's a lot better odds than an NA team has had for, again, over a decade. And so that's why it's so darn depressing that we get into these games and we see them just throwing away this amazing opportunity that they have as a team by making all of these dumb little mistakes over and over again. And again, the other regions, the other teams are watching and will pick up on the way that they're drafting, the champions that they're, for some reason considering meta that the other teams aren't. And they are going to be able to close in and take away these advantages. They're going to look at the way that they're itemizing and all of these things. They will eventually adopt these things if they're actually good and if they're actually better than what the other teams are doing. The other teams are eventually just going to adopt them, and your advantage is going to disappear really quickly. Because if I can tell you one thing about top tier League of Legends, it's that if you have an edge, it will not last for very long, because other teams will recognize that it's good, will recognize that you're having success with it. They will break it down, they will study it, and they will understand it, and then they will start using it. And now when you have a team like next year, the number 1, seed from Korea is maybe playing Ivern again or something like that, your advantage is gone. And they're just a better team in all other aspects of the game, and you're just doomed. And so it's while you have these unique opportunities where you're ahead of the curve on thinking about certain ways to play the game, thinking about scaling, thinking about the meta, thinking about what champions are good, the way that you're drafting, the way that you're itemizing, when all of these things are on point for you and other teams are behind, you are throwing away a massive once-in-a-decade opportunity because you're just not playing clean, basic League of Legends. And again, where is the coaching when you see these mistakes, these basic mistakes happening game after game after game, throwing away these early games? When they have so much potential, where is the coaching to step in and say, we're making this mistake, let's clean it up? And then it should be getting better. But we're already at this point where it's like, okay, we're going to go up against Gen G. It has to be to beat Gen G, which essentially for FlyQuest, like if they beat Gen G, right, then obviously they are a real contender to win the world championship. But it's a very, very difficult, very daunting task for them to go up against Gen G and actually have a chance at winning. Very difficult for them to win. The only way they can win is if they clean up all of these mistakes. So my concern comes from me seeing them in their series against Team Liquid to make it out of Swiss in their last games, still making the same mistakes that we're seeing game after game. It just feels like so much wasted potential. Okay, so here we have another clip, and we've got a situation where, once again, we have opted into a lane swap as FlyQuest. Again, a tank support versus a tank support. So I don't really see a reason in terms of the bot lane matchup why you would necessarily want to switch Kai'Sa and Leona away from Jhin Rel. I think that it's a pretty even matchup, and there's not much wrong with playing this matchup out this way. And you have to know if you're Bwipo here. I get that there's fog, but you just have to know Rel is here. And then the other thing that's really confusing is usually in this situation like we talked about, oh, well, FlyQuest is initiating this lane swap because they're picking the Ivern, right? So they're initiating because they're picking the Ivern. Well, where is the Ivern here? The Ivern isn't here to defend Bwipo from the dive, so why are we swapping? It just doesn't make any sense. And so Bwipo actually ease in here when we, at best, don't know where Rel is, right? At best, don't know where Rel is. He actually ease in here and just dies. Doesn't make any sense. It's terrible, too, because you have this gigantic minion wave coming into you. I assume he teleports and at least is able to pick up the tail end of the wave. It's just, it's bad, man. It's like, why are we making these basic mistakes? You're playing in the 1v2 side of the matchup because your team has initiated the swap. For whatever reason, Ivern is not there to defend you in case you're getting dove. If you are getting dove, like you cannot, whether you're getting dove or whether Rel's there, Ivern not being there, your bot lane, having swapped, you're strong, your strong weak side, right? Like your ultra weak side. Why, if you're ultra weak side, are you eing in on Renekton into multiple people? It just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't care if you don't know where Rel is or not. You have to assume that she's there. Or even, again, just playing off a basic macro in the early game, you know that, okay, my jungler's not here to protect me in case I get dove. Again, like that trade he took on Darius versus Ione that set him up for the dive. Even if Vi wasn't there at that moment to dive him, if he takes a heavy trade, even just against the Jhin, it's not like he's going to kill Jhin there. Jin's full HP. So since he's not going to actually have lethal on Jhin there and not actually be able to kill the Jhin there, what are we even doing by Eing in? What are we even accomplishing? Because since we're weak-sided and our jungler's on the top side anyways, all that we're doing if we trade half of our HP for half of Jin's HP or something rough, even if we trade 30% of our HP for 70% of Jin's HP, that we're just opening ourselves up to a dive because we're on the weak side of the map. It just doesn't make sense. And you've got to respect where the Rel can be if you don't know where she is, and he probably just straight up knew where she was. But it definitely seems like he played it like he didn't know. So here we go again, and we probably need a little bit more context on this clip, unfortunately, but again, we're just going through some quick highlights, so we're not going to have full context on everything. So obviously, Bwipo's found himself in a 1v4 situation under turret, and we're going to need to do something here on FlyQuest. It looks like there's not a whole lot Bwipo can do in a situation like this, and he does what I believe to be the correct thing, which is to just dive straight in onto Maple, since he's just going to get dove if he tries to stay under the turret anyways. He picks up nearly all of the CS, and he tries to get the cannon minion here, but unfortunately is not quite able to get it before he dies, right? So as FlyQuest, we have to do something here to make up for this situation that just happened. So when we're looking at what's going on here, on the bot side, they threaten the dive onto Gnar, but don't actually have the ability to do it. And in mid lane, they drop the Rift Herald to try to take the mid turret, but also don't have the damage or the ability to take the mid turret. Inspired literally just gets caught overextending, essentially hoping that they're able to take this mid turret here, and just continuing to look on Maple here for just too long, right? Not realizing that they're rotating down from the bot side or from the top side. Again, I have no idea what Busio is thinking right here, right? You've got multiple people moving in from the top side of the map. I know they can't see everyone, right? But what in the world are you doing right here? There is no world in which you're looking to fight right here. Currently, FlyQuest lost Bwipo in top lane. They lost Inspired off of that play mid lane, and they didn't successfully dive bot lane. So PSG currently has 5 people alive, and FlyQuest has 3. In what world are we looking to camp a bush here and then go in? It just makes absolutely no sense. And then what's really unfortunate about this is Busio's obviously just dead, but unfortunately Quad and Masu stick around a little bit to try to help get him out, even though he's clearly just dead. And it ends up resulting in Masu dying as well. So now, again, just like the previous game, in a matter of minutes, against not even that good of a team, right? PSG is a great wildcard team. They're, one of the best wildcard teams we've seen in a long time. So I don't mean to put them down or anything like that, but they are still a wildcard team from the PCS. They're a good team, right? Don't get me wrong. They're a good team. But you know, my point is this is no Dom one, right? Any team that is at Worlds is going to capitalize heavy on this level of early game shenanigans and just complete lack of understanding of how to play the early game, especially just around the map in general. It's really, really bad, and it's costing them a ton. So now you've fallen down 2-8 versus essentially a wild card team. And I believe this is a game that actually FlyQuest ended up winning. So imagine what happened in games, where they didn't win. So obviously look at how strong their team comp is, right? This is the beauty of FlyQuest drafting. The Renekton, the the Ivern, playing picks even like the Darius, although I don't think we'll see it much again. I don't think Bwipo was really that prepared in terms of how he played the champion, but maybe we'll see. The Cassiopeia in mid, they're just really innovating with some of their picks. Again, not just the Ivern, but the Amumu, the Nunu, the different things that they've been pulling out that are just these very easy to play, simple champions that provide so much power that are just being completely overlooked by so many teams right now at Worlds. And so it's just sad, right? When you look at how strong this team comp is, it's just so sad when they're so far ahead in terms of their drafting, right? When they're able to put a team comp where they can go down 2-8 and still manage to very easily come back and win every team fight, right? They could play these comps against a good Korean team. And if they play the early game well, but not quite as well as the Koreans, and the game's pretty even, they're down 2,000 gold versus a Korean team, but they giga outscale because they're better at drafting than the Korean teams, then FlyQuest actually stands a chance, like I said, at putting themselves at a decent percentage odds to potentially win the world championship. But it just doesn't look like that's going to be a possibility or a reality with how they're playing these early game situations out. And so it's just too darn depressing, like I keep saying, because they should have this amazing ceiling and amazing potential with how far ahead of other teams they are with these drafts. And yet they can't capitalize on how far ahead they are in the meta compared to other teams because of the fact that their fundamental League of Legends is really, really flawed. And it's sad because it's so much harder to be innovative with amazing, 1 year ahead metas, essentially, where you're so far ahead of other regions in terms of champion picks and drafting. And yet, despite being ahead in those areas, it's actually the simple things that you should pick up and clean up in solo queue, even in basic scrims throughout the year, playing in your domestic region, no matter how bad that region is. And yet it's these basic situations that we're failing to capitalize on. In this game, Hanwha Life decided to lane swap because they had a melee support in Rel versus the Renata and again the Callista. So because they picked a very, very dominant bot lane again on the side of FlyQuest, HLE decides to initiate the lane swap. So what do we see here as a result of them initiating the lane swap? Well, unfortunately, Quad gets caught by a very similar mistake where, although it's earlier into the game, he walks to place a ward because he has suspicions that this play could be happening. We even see it right now. Bwipo, right, doesn't know in top lane where the Rel is. We just don't know, right? And so since we don't know where the Rel is and she should be top lane, but we're not seeing it, there's got to be some communication here that this is odd. We don't know where anyone is. And so It's just very unfortunate timing, but similar to that situation before, Quad basically just gets caught by a gank in mid here when multiple people are missing. And then unfortunately, Bwipo is opened up to the dive here. And then in this situation, Quad just straight up gets solo killed, unfortunately. And so obviously, like, regardless of the matchup, you just can't allow this to happen to yourself. You just can't. You just got to know your limits a little bit better here, stand a little bit further back. We've got to think about what's going on here too, right? Like, in the mid lane matchup, what are we actually looking to do here, right? Like, what is so bad about Cassiopeia waiting for this wave to come into its turret? I guess Yone is going to get a roam timer, but Yone is basically always going to get a roam timer here because he's already in control of the situation. If you can't do anything to stop it and you're just going to die anyways, then that's obviously not a better solution. The crazy thing here is, as well, is that the miasma from Cassio may have actually prevented Zeka from going back on his own E, and so he is kind of forced to stay and fight Quad. Whereas because there were people on the way, Bwipo was actually right on the way. I think Zeka, playing conservatively, might have actually just backed off, and he died by just one auto attack, right? So if he had just backed off with his E one auto attack sooner, Cassio would have lived. And so I think it's really interesting because I think knowing that people were probably collapsing on him and coming, I think Zeka might have actually just not committed. Even if he potentially could have, he may have just not committed to killing here, because a lot of pros would play this safe and play it conservatively, but you obviously just can't die like this. And then Masu and Busio just get killed 2v2 here. Can kind of look at how this happens. They're pushing up to the turret. We can see Sejuani running up top lane. Again, just not really respecting that Sejuani can be there. And then instead of leaving, they think that they can actually commit to the fight and win here, which apparently they can't. And then they end up getting 2v2'd. It's very obvious that at least one of them could have survived here had they just taken the Callista ult out, for example. But they actually thought that they won. So this Baron take is essentially where things really start to take a turn for the worst in game one for HLE. And it's really crazy because, again, if we look at the score line, we have yet again a situation where it's 8-2, 4 grubs to 2, 2 dragons to 1, right, is the situation. So it's a very, very tough situation. And yet, despite that situation, right, being down 3k gold with all of these things, FlyQuest is able to find an amazing team fight. And again, they have an extremely good, extremely unique comp where now FlyQuest is willing to pull out, again, the Cassiopeia mid that not a lot of other teams are playing. We've got another interesting top lane pick that nobody else is playing in the Urgot. We've got the Amumu again, right? And so we continue to see these just amazing drafts out of FlyQuest continue to outperform some crazy good teams. And so in a game where by all means FlyQuest should be completely out of the game, they're actually able to fight back in these games and give themselves a chance to win. So again, if they're able to do well in a game like this, imagine if they made less of these mistakes early. I believe they actually go on to come back and win this game. Or maybe they brought the game back to a point where they were looking like they were going to win it, and then they threw it. I think that's what happened, and then they won a different game in this series. So, but regardless, right, when you're looking at this situation, FlyQuest is able to fight back. That's how good their comp is. That's how good their draft is. That's how far ahead of the curve they are when it comes to how they're team fighting, the angles that they're finding in these fights. It's just really, really good League of Legends, objectively. Like, yes, they end up losing to some teams. Yes, they're an NA team, but it's not delusional to say that the way that they're playing these games is incredibly well, despite the early game mistakes. And so imagine if they found themselves with these comms in these fights, but in a situation where they were, again, only down like 2,000 gold and just barely making any free mistakes that they were giving over to the other team in the early game, but instead, only these like very, very hard to deal with high value plays that some of these Korean and Chinese teams at a really, really high level, just the best teams of the world, are eventually inevitably going to be able to find on them in some situations. But if you can just mitigate or like half the amount of terrible plays that are happening for FlyQuest in the early game by fixing some of these basic fundamentals and then getting them to these stages in the game where they're able to pilot their team comps in team fights like this, and they're able to draft such amazing comps, they're going to actually have a competitive shot here. And again, this is against HLE, which is literally the #1 seed from Korea, right? Who they took to a very, very close best of 3 series. Right. So if they're able to give HLE a run for their money when they were down 8-2, 4,000 gold, imagine what they could do if they cleaned up their early game and they were down 2K or 1K, and like 4 kills to 2 instead of, just getting completely blown out of the water. It's a completely different story, right? If these games are being played out in a different way, so what ends up happening here? So they just have this one, I remember this. So they obviously brought themselves really far back into this game. They were winning every team fight, multiple team fights in a row. And then they just have this one really unfortunate moment where HLE commits everything because they don't have many options left in this game, to be honest. They just commit everything with the Sejuani ult first to getting this pick onto Bwipo in the jungle. I think at this point, if you're FlyQuest, although it's hard to see in the moment, so it's a little bit hindsight, but at this point, if you're FlyQuest, Bwipo is clearly just dead here. And I think because of the fact that they're used to playing these comps where Bwipo is caught like this, but then the fights are turning around, even in some of these fights earlier this game, they're committing fully to this play and trying to save Bwipo here and actually turn this into an engage. And so unfortunately, Bwipo is just dead anyways regardless, and now Cassio is TPing into the middle of this fight, and I mean the absolute middle of this fight. And Amumu is not even here yet, and Masu gets tagged by the Yone ult. This is just a really unfortunate way for this game to end, and a really nice play from HLE to find a pick here. But this singular pick should really have no business leading to 5 people dying and the game being thrown. And keep in mind that this series went 2-1. So had FlyQuest simply mitigated some of their bad plays early in this game and not fallen so far behind, they would have been in a much more winning situation even earlier, instead of having to make this insane comeback happen that, almost came to fruition but didn't quite work. And even with the game state that they were in, despite having been down 8-2 and so much gold, they still could have won this game from this position had they just let Bwipo die in the jungle here and not fully committed to teleporting in and hexgating in to the middle of this fight that was going to wind up being basically a 4v5 anyways, because Bwipo was getting picked. And so unfortunately, FlyQuest just full sent for their teammate here and tried to play this out as a full team fight, and it ends up costing them this comeback that they had going on. So that's obviously just like very, very unfortunate and very, very sad outcome. But that's why I say, and it's this series in particular that should make you think, FlyQuest has potential to be a world championship contender despite being a team from the West and despite being a team from NA. And why do I think that is? Part of the reason why I think that is because we can see in multiple of these games, like the game versus PSG and then this series versus Hom1 Life, they're able to make such amazing comebacks happen from so far behind. And if they weren't so far behind, they would just be that much stronger. And so it's just amazing to think, how strong FlyQuest is as a team, if only they had cleaned up some of these early game plays and shenanigans. Because had they not made that late game mistake there, or had they not been so far behind in the early game in game one, they would have won game one, and then had these other things played out the same way. They would have essentially won this series 2-1. But because of that, they ended up losing this series. And again, HLE is the number one seed from Korea. So FlyQuest, barring one error right at the end of the game, trying to play for Bwipo there instead of just disengaging, was basically in a 90% chance of winning that game. If they were that close to taking this best of three versus Hanwhan Life, there's no reason why they shouldn't be competitive to take the world championship. So you get what I'm saying, right? If you say that the top teams in the world are like BLG, Hanwha Life, and Genji, and FlyQuest is even with Hanwha Life, then essentially there's a big argument to be made that FlyQuest is right in there in the mix at like a top 4 team, competing with like Hanwha Life and Genji evenly, and potentially, especially with a weakened Bilibili, potentially just better than them as well. Now, I know that's a very optimistic take. I'm not saying that that's the case, but I'm just trying to give you where I'm coming from here, which is that if FlyQuest is competitive with HLE, and you truly believe that the 3 best teams in the world are BLG, HLE, and Genji, then there's no reason why you wouldn't necessarily think that FlyQuest, depending on how good T1, and this is why we have the World Championship, we don't know exactly how they compare to each other, but there's no reason to believe that, FlyQuest couldn't potentially be, up there with those 3 teams. The other teams that would be right behind them would be DK, T1, and Top Esports, and maybe all 3 of those teams are better than FlyQuest, but that still puts FlyQuest at like the 7th best team in the world. And again, the 7th best team in the world is pretty darn good for an NA team, and it gives them at least a decent shot, especially when the gap between them being 7 and them being like 4th or 3rd or 1st is not that big. If they have a 5 or a 10% chance again at winning Worlds, that's a lot better shot at winning Worlds than NA teams have had in literally over a decade. And so do not sleep on FlyQuest, but the problem is that they keep making these mistakes in the early game and throwing away their potential. So here we have another situation where we have an Ezreal Poppy versus a Callista Leona. And it's just strange that for some reason, again, we've decided to now not lane swap the Callista Leona versus a Poppy, when we did this in the same situation except with Jhin. Maybe it's because we have Olaf top lane and Nunu jungle instead of the Ivern, like in the first situation, which is what I said. It probably came down to the Ivern, but it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It seems like they're a little bit inconsistent with when they're going for these lane swaps. Again, more interesting picks: Olaf in top lane, Hui in mid lane, that these other teams are just not picking at all. So very interesting there. I think Hui is really strong in mid right now, at least from my experience with the champion and playing against it. We'll see. I think Olaf could be a valuable asset, potentially in some of these like lane swap situations or dives. So that's interesting to see. Bwipo's movement is just really weird here. So he's like very obviously going to get dove. And he pops the ghost to try to start outplaying the dive. And he just runs backwards, right? Like he's going to run off the turret. And then he turns around. But there's no root coming out because Peanut doesn't have to wait for the root to come out. Instead, Peanut is waiting for Doran to to just W so that he can guarantee the Zyra E. So the question would be, why is Bwipo either just not running off of turret like initially when he was running here? So you ghost. He just decides to turn back into the wave, but he eats like all of his HP doing that. So again, I just think not very well played in terms of the micro. Obviously, Doran actually gets taken pretty low. And this was considering Bwipo was focusing the wave and not really committing to either staying under the turret and trying to dodge. I mean, again, imagine if when Doran goes for W here, imagine if he has to do that in a much more compromising place under tower. Do you see he's doing this at the edge of turret range, and then he's able to E out of turret range. So now Renekton's not tanking the turret anymore. Whereas if this exact same thing happened, but you were, let's say, right behind your turret, right in the center, so that they were as close to your turret as possible, you force them to take more turret shots, and then since Doran only lives, he would have died if he took another turret shot, which is actually why we see him flash away here. And he did not need to flash here. The laser would have not locked into him. But since he only needed one more turret shot on him, obviously had he forced Renekton to stun him right next to the tower, Renekton would have taken that extra turret shot and probably died, or maybe he would have been able to get out of it with his flash, but he would have actually, you don't know that Doran is going to blow his flash for no reason here, so you would have at least gotten the flash for free, or you wouldn't have known to that level of detail exactly how it was going to play out, maybe. So, you know, I think that the micro from the dive wasn't that good, so we open ourselves up to a dive yet again, and so that's not good. Then again, we've got a classic situation of Bwipo walking back into the turret and then setting up a dive on him. He's able to leverage the Olaf ult here to make it a little bit better on himself. But again, just, you know, not a whole lot he could even do in that situation. So it's like, what are we doing here? You know, on the other side of the map, what are we trading? And I guess the answer is just there's no opportunity to trade anything. So that's very unfortunate. You have to wonder then, like, are we able to be there top to support him? If we're not doing anything bot lane anyways, can Leona not be up there? Can Nunu not be up there? I know Nunu's camps were up bot side, but, you know, obviously that ends up being really bad. And then Bwipo's really far behind at this point, so unfortunately Bwipo just gets run down here and solo killed by Doran. This is kind of, you know, I guess more of a result, obviously, of... no, I mean, he just walks up to him and starts fighting him here. I was going to give him an excuse and say that this was because, you know, of the multiple dives that have happened and how weak he is. But there's just no reason why he should be walking up to him here. I mean, look at this. There's not even a minion wave met yet. And he's immediately walking up to him and just starting to fight him and trade him. Maybe he was actually like looking at the other side of the map or something when this happened, like walked into him on accident. I mean, this is just crazy. But this is exactly what I'm talking about, that like they make these mistakes constantly. And again, this is a game that FlyQuest ends up winning. You know, and so again, we have a situation where FlyQuest is going to go down quite a bit, and then they're going to end up coming back and winning because of their drafts. And it's like, imagine if we just played decent, solid, fundamental League of Legends from the beginning and didn't have to come back from these huge deficits. And we're just managing to play the game, like lose gracefully against these teams that are obviously just better than you mechanically and at early game rotations and dives and stuff like that. Just let them do their thing, but don't give them many, many free openings by going in on them when you're in a vulnerable position, or, you know, completely rotating people to the wrong lanes and things like that. And if we can avoid these situations, then all of a sudden, instead of getting absolutely dumped on in these games and having to make crazy comebacks in all of the games we do manage to win, we're just going to be winning all of our games because we're not even that far behind, and our team comps are just light years ahead of everyone else in the, you know, in the competition. So it's crazy to me that we're seeing this. So here's like another blown play. Let's see what happens here. So the two of them, Inspired and Bwipo, are going on to Zeka. Kind of hard to lock him down because he's a Yasuo. A little bit poor Nunu E, and the ult didn't do him any favors there either, getting hit by the Yasuo Q into ult. Really locked him up. The play just ended up getting busted up and taking too long. This ends up being a really good play on a Viper, though. This was the other thing that I thought was that, for such a like meta defining team too, I think that Busio is maybe, and I don't want to say like replace him because they're doing quite well, but he's maybe not quite the right fit for this team. I think that they would really potentially benefit from having a more versatile support player that can play some of these other champions better. And maybe, I'd need to see more of him, but he didn't really look very comfortable in the game where he was playing Rel in the first game of this series. But he looks a lot better here in all of these games that he's playing Leona. And obviously, it's a very good meta for a lot of, regular support players because a lot of us, play tank supports like Leona and Rel and stuff like that over and over and over again. And so it's a great meta for champion mastery for most support players, at the competition. But that being said, you've got to be able to play, especially if it really benefits a team that really needs to win and excel through some of these crazy drafts. Being able to play more than Leona effectively, I think would be really, really good for this team. Although, you can't knock Busio too much because obviously him and Masu have managed to do a pretty good job in a lot of these games. And his Leona is very proficient. And I think his champions that are similar to Leona, such as Rel, is also pretty decent. So we can just see here, and a lot of this is, to give him some credit, off of the back of Busio's amazing Leona gameplay. Is FlyQuest again is just able to kind of claw their way back into this game and into this series, even from a very big deficit. So where they were in a situation where it was something like 5-2, and they were down 3,000 to 4,000 gold. They managed to claw their way back into this game quite a bit. And after this kill here, after this team fight, we're looking at what? It's like 6-8. And they're about to find more. 6-8, and they're down like 1k gold. So it's just so many situations here where FlyQuest is just able to leverage their draft and their champions into just amazing mid-game performances, where they're able to just completely flip games on its head. And you can see like just how one-sided a lot of these situations end up being for FlyQuest, even in this series versus a team that really is like a world championship contending team, arguably one of the best teams in the world. The worst you would rank HLE, in my opinion, is like top 3. So if FlyQuest is really going toe-to-toe with a top 3 team, I think obviously there's the argument, like I've said before, to be made that FlyQuest is really right there as like maybe, the 4th team or something like that. And I know that sounds rather optimistic because we're putting them ahead of so many Chinese teams, and we're putting them ahead of T1 and stuff like that, and DK, and they lost to DK. But I think that it's not that I'm saying that I think FlyQuest is the 4th best team at Worlds or in the world right now. It's just that I think that they have the potential to be up there pretty even with, the top 4 teams at Worlds. And like I said before, it's just about playing this kind of numbers game where you at least, compared to what NA's had in the past and even the West, over the past decade or so, you're at least giving them a run for their money. You're playing well, and you're doing something different and unique with Western players, with a draft and a meta that's really your own meta-defining approach to the game. And it's just beautiful League of Legends all around. And so when you see how hard FlyQuest is able to come back, how well they're able to team fight together, it's just a shame that they're, again, making all of these early game mistakes that are just completely holding them back, from being just an absolute like top tier world's contender. And like I said, they may never have this opportunity again, even if FlyQuest remains the same roster, and it stays ahead of the curve or whatever. Like other teams will, meaning they, well, it's kind of hard to stay ahead of the curve is the problem. It's like other teams are going to see the success that they're having with their drafts, and other teams, even in Eastern regions, are probably going to start adopting some of these champions. And once they've had time to work it in, these teams are just going to execute the comps that FlyQuest are playing better. And so FlyQuest will be remembered maybe as a team that innovated, from one meta to the next, but they won't be remembered as a team that was able to capitalize on that innovation to become, like a really big world's contender. And that's what we're looking for, but it's going to require them to clean up these plays. So here in game 3, we have another classic FlyQuest early game moment where we potentially don't know where Skarner is. Let's see what we have leading up to this. Actually, no. Again, okay, so this is a little bit before. Let's see what the time jumps to. So around 6:52, we see that Skarner's taken the Void Grubs. So we are 1 minute later, to be fair. I think Masu is currently pinging, though. Somebody's pinging the Skarner right here. And they actually have a ward, so now they see it. Why is Busio going in, trying to start this 2v2 fight, when Masu is clearly backing up because he knows what's up? They're not communicating this well enough. And if you don't know where Peanut Skarner is, you just can't go in here. So again, it's these situations where so many times we see Bwipo, we see Busio, we see Quad, just essentially going in or trying to trade, just making these basic errors, going in and trying to trade when you don't know where people are, or when you clearly some of your teammates do know where people are, but we're not communicating what's going on in the game. And so there's just, I've said this so many times in my videos actually to try to help just everybody understand League better, that League is so much a game about just counting heads and trying to figure out where people are. And look, it's not a game of perfect information. A lot of times you're not going to know where everybody is. But if you don't know where somebody is, most of the time, especially the higher level you go, especially in pro play, especially at Worlds, if you don't know where somebody is, especially a jungler like Skarner that can gank you from any angle and has a ton of CC and is tanky and ready to dive you, you cannot be randomly going in and fighting all of the time when you don't know where people are. You only ever use your W like that on Rel when you know that the jungler's on the other side of the map, or when you know your jungler is right next to you ready to make a play. You literally just never use the ability. It's basic League of Legends at a high level. And it's just so sad that we see FlyQuest continuing to make these mistakes over and over and over again in the early game. And we can only imagine that if they had this basic grasp across the board and they just never made these mistakes again, where they weren't recognizing where people were on the map and they're just randomly going in and getting dove or getting chunked and setting themselves up to get dove, if they weren't making these mistakes, would they not, literally a team that's competing, one of the first Western teams we've had in a very, very long time, who's able to compete toe-to-toe, game-to-game, in a full series against a number 1 Korean seed, if this team could just please, if they could just please fix some of these mistakes. We come back and we see Bwipo dying here top. What happened with this? I mean, we don't quite have enough context. It's not like he committed too hard or anything here, but obviously he got close to the Gnar. I mean, he's got to play the lane though. But it's a similar situation, right? At least in this situation, it's fine. I would say. Oh, never mind. I mean, there is crossplay on the other side of the map, but it doesn't go well for them. So again, we're down 4-1. We're losing the dragon. We're down 6 grubs to 0. We're down 2 or 3k gold. So again, imagine if these mistakes aren't being made and we're actually just even in the game. Here we go again onto Bwipo. And this doesn't even make sense to me, right? Bwipo was doing totally fine here, and they're just going to take the turret. If he walks away here after the dive, they're just going to take the turret, and he's going to farm these minions a little bit further back. But for some reason, he walks up because he wants the minions. He walks up here and kills himself when there was literally no way that he was going to die here. Like, he's just 100% not dead here. And for some reason, he somehow manages to die here instead of just backing up, letting them take the turret, and then getting the minions after. I mean, at least in this situation, he got most of the minions, but he could have farmed these for free without dying. So it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Not the worst play, though, that we've seen, but not good. Again, with the innovative picks, we've got the Scion, we've got the Cassiopeia again. Not a lot of other teams running Scion top. I think Scion top is a very good pick considering the lane swaps, because if he dies to the turret dive, he's a very tanky, low resource champion. He is able to pick up a lot of the CS even if he dies to the dives in the lane swap situation. Or a dive in general, which are happening quite a lot. He's able to pick a lot up because he's able to get, with his passive, he's able to pick up a lot of the CS. And yet, we have that innovative pick. We also have Vi, which, not too crazy, but obviously FlyQuest is playing Vi. Not a lot of other teams doing that either. Cassiopeia we've talked about before. So they've got this whole wheelhouse of picks. In top lane, it's things like the Urgot, the Scion, the Darius that they've been playing. In jungle, it's the Amumu, the Ivern, the Nunu, the Vi, right? These basic, easy to execute on, but very strong, underrated junglers. And then in mid lane, it's certain picks like the Hui, the Cassiopeia, that we just don't see a lot of other teams running, and it's been very, very good. And look, not every pick has to be crazy innovative. Maybe the meta in bot lane is, just a good meta and the correct thing. And it obviously looks like playing these tank engage supports for Busio, the Rel, the Leona, is obviously his strong suit, and he does well playing those and supporting the rest of his team by doing that. So I don't think that you should necessarily change that up. So I think that that's fine. And so we just have this situation here where, they're down 9,000 gold, and it just seems rather hopeless, right? And it's all stemming from the fact that in the early game, they just put themselves too far behind to really put up any sort of competitive fight in this game at this point. So in my opinion, FlyQuest really has, two modes, right, that we see in the vast majority of their games. Are they not ending? Maybe they can't end here. One mode is that we see FlyQuest, just making a lot of early game micro mistakes and macro mistakes just all across the board, getting solo killed in lane. We've seen it in mid lane. We've seen it in top lane. They're getting solo killed in lane. They're getting dove constantly and not covering their dives. They're lane swapping sometimes when it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They're their early game is just not good. They're trading when they don't know where people are and then just getting killed by basic ganks. They're trading and losing a bunch of their HP when they're weak side and a bunch of people are coming to dive them. There just seems to be a general lack of awareness with the way that they're playing the game in the early game. And so that leads to the first type of game that FlyQuest has, where they just fall really far behind in the early game and they can't manage to come back and win the game because they're just so darn far behind. Then the other type of game is the game where FlyQuest has a bad early game, but their comp is strong enough compared to how bad of an early game that they had that they're able to recover and come back despite the deficit that they put themselves at in the early game, because they only put themselves at like a 4K gold deficit, let's say, at a certain time, or they have a particularly harder scaling comp than usual. And so it's in those situations where they excel. And if they could just clean it up so that their worst case scenario game was those games where they're getting 4 or 5K behind, then they're just not dropping a whole lot of games at all at Worlds, and they're Worlds contenders. So if they can find that third mode where they're actually managing to mitigate their mistakes enough that they're barely behind to actually even with the other team, then their draft and their itemization being so far ahead of these other teams and their understanding of the meta being so far ahead of these other teams could actually carry them to a world championship as a Western team. But if and only if they stop giving up like 10 kills early every single game on many different mistakes in the early game. And I worry that with only, 2 days left and with them playing like this up until their very last game, I just don't think, and with them having a very hard first opponent, maybe if they had drawn against a slightly weaker opponent to start out the quarterfinals, maybe they would have had a better shot. But unfortunately, because they're going up against one of the top teams in the world in Gen G, one of, I would put top 3 team, I picked them, I think, to, well, I guess we didn't pick in Pick'ems exactly to win Worlds, but I picked them as the team that would make it out of groups undefeated or out of Swiss stage undefeated, because I went into Worlds believing that Gen G was the best team at Worlds. There's an argument, my top 3 would be BLG and then HLE are in there. I would say there's a good argument for BLG, but after how they've performed in the Swiss stage, I think that they look like they're a little bit vulnerable and shaky. Although obviously, I mean, the same could be said for FlyQuest, but even worse. But we're talking about like Gen G versus FlyQuest. I think that Gen G is arguably the best team in the world. So it becomes very difficult. Like they had a very close final versus HLE in Korea. Otherwise, they would have just been the number 1 seed. Before that series, they had pretty much had HLE's number, and I do believe they actually played like a rematch best of 3 or something to get out, didn't they? And Gen G actually won that time versus HLE here at Worlds. So I think Gen G is arguably like the best team at Worlds. And then with BLG, is that? Yeah, BLG, Billy Gaming, with them faltering so far at Worlds, and looking vulnerable because they had a little bit of a weak run in the Swiss stage and lost to some teams people didn't expect them to lose to. I think that when you look at that, if those were your top 3, obviously Gen G has proven that they're capable. I mean, they can't do anything more to prove that they're capable of beating HLE than beating HLE straight up to prove that they're the number 1 team instead of the number 2 team. And, you couldn't do much more without seeing them directly play each other, to see BLG falter like they did in Swiss stage. Obviously, Gen G is probably, just objectively looking at it, probably the best team at Worlds right now. And so for FlyQuest to face them first is really, really tough and unfortunate, because maybe if they had played versus an LNG or a Weibo or even a T1 or maybe even a top esports or maybe even a best of 5, but versus DK, these are teams that maybe if they had cleaned some things up, or if they had more games to showcase their stuff, they could at least give those series a real run for their money. But going up against Gen G, they need to play really, really well. They need perfection. They need to really clean up their game. And I just think it's too short of a period of time to go from the series that they had versus Team Liquid, where they continued to make these mistakes against a really weak opponent, right? Even weaker, obviously, than HLE, potentially even as weak or weaker than PSG, And so to go up against a weak opponent and drop a game and continue to be making some of these same mistakes is really, really bad. And so I'm really worried about FlyQuest because they had so much opportunity here, but with a really tough draw and not a lot of time to fix the problems in their gameplay, and they're consistently making these same basic mistakes over and over again game to game, it just seems a little bit doomed. So once again, jumping into the situation, we see that FlyQuest, this doesn't make any sense. Right? FlyQuest has opted into the lane swap because they're the ones that have gone top, but they're actually the ones with the range support versus the melee support matchup. So again, it just seems like they don't understand when and why to do this lane swap. And they don't have Ivern this time, so it just doesn't make sense because we've had situations where it seems like they do it with Ivern because they have Ivern, but then sometimes they're doing it even if they don't have Ivern. Right? And then we see them doing it melee support versus melee support. We see them doing it when they have the range support. It just doesn't make any sense. It seems so random when they're deciding to do these lane swaps compared to some of the other teams that are just consistently doing it when they're, swapping that melee support out of the range support matchup. So obviously they've opted into this swap. And we're waiting to see, what happens here with the dive onto Bwipo. Obviously, he's getting chunked and taken very low, but he's managed to collect most of the golden XP so far from the wave, so we'll see. He's probably just dead here because he's wasted his Q3. Yep. So they opted into that, and Bwipo just gets left to die again. So again, here we don't have a lot of context leading into this, but we can see this control ward here. So I don't really know, how Xin Zhao and Tahm Kench are able to walk at Ashe and get this close into range of Ashe here. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially Ashe doesn't have sums. So why are you just not looking at the map and seeing the Xin Zhao and the Tahm Kench come in on this control ward and immediately backing off? And so he just gets caught here to, again, a basic warded gank. It's just basic League of Legends. It's like, if we can clean up the basic League of Legends, they might actually just go and win a world championship as an NA team. And yet it's so depressing because we can't clean up the most basic League of Legends. Wait, Busio's kind of popping off here. Nice. No way we're dying to this again, by the way. We see him take the Void Grubs. We knew that he was up here in the first place. We're literally pinging that he's coming, and we're just dying to the most basic ganks when we know where the enemy jungler is, and our jungler is 5 seconds away. So if we just aren't heavily trading all in with the Jax, we can literally just back up and wait 5 seconds and our jungler is there. It's so frustrating because this is basic high elo solo queue level of gameplay that is just not being executed upon. And again, the team has so much potential because they're so ahead in the drafting, in the meta read, in the itemization, in how their players think about the game. In all of these aspects, they're so far ahead. And it's those kinds of things is exactly what a Western team needs to be able to win against a team from Korea or China that is going to be objectively, mechanically better at the game than them and is objectively going to be better at these macro decisions than them. These teams are just better, and you need to have some other edge, and it's usually going to come from some creative aspect of the game, like draft, like meta reads, like itemization, that's going to give you some extra edge versus one of these teams. But you need to have a basic grasp on the fundamentals of the game to at least be competitive on that fundamental basic level, so that you can actually survive and not go down so much gold that you lose no matter what team comp you have, because they're draft kingdoming every team that they're playing against. And again, but it doesn't matter what team. They could be playing against Team Liquid, it could be PSG, it could be Gigabyte Marines. They are playing against some of the worst teams in the tournament, and these teams are able to punish their mistakes because of how bad and how basic they are. You should not be dying to 2 full information ganks, in 10 minutes to Team Liquid, right? When you know that they're doing these things. And it's the same in all of these matchups. They could be playing the worst team at Worlds. They could be playing a solo queue game versus 5 challenger players. And these people are going to gank you in these situations and punish you for continuing to trade and go into a person when you know that their jungler is right there next to them. It just doesn't make sense. So if they just clean up the basic fundamental League of Legends, then they will actually be competitive at Worlds. And I hope, all I can do is hope, that when they play against Gen G, that they've actually managed to clean up these plays, and that they've had these conversations, and that they've VOD reviewed the games that we're looking at, and that they stop making these mistakes, or at least like cut them in half so that they don't get behind 4, 5, 6,000 gold, and they're actually able to keep their series competitive and give themselves a chance to make it to the next stage. Because I promise you, if this team had a little bit more time and good coaching to clean up these mistakes, they would be in a position to contest Worlds, because they're the first Western team that has had a real large draft edge and meta edge on these other teams. But they can't grasp, because they're in such a weak region. We're such a weak region that these other teams that they're practicing against all year just can't push them to learn the basic fundamentals of League of Legends at a pro level. And so they're making these same basic mistakes over and over and over again, and it's killing our chances of winning Worlds. It's so sad. Look, and surprise, surprise, in game 1 against Team Liquid, they were down and they made some of these mistakes early, but it was offset by Team Liquid making some of their, same mistakes early. And because they weren't down very much, they're just able to completely destroy them in this game. And so it's like, if you're not making these mistakes and you're just down a reasonable amount in these games versus teams that are better than you, like when you're playing against these really top tier Korean and Chinese teams, if you can just mitigate your mistakes in the early game and not go down too hard and too far in gold, then you just easily roll over these teams with the picks that you guys have and the itemization that you're going. So it's just so depressing to watch us throw away our chances. So again, in game 2, when we take a look at whether there was a lane swap or not, there's no lane swap, but this I also find weird. And the reason for this one is, well, the bot lane matchup is fine either way. I mean, FlyQuest has the range support matchup after all, although it's Rakan. And actually Rakan Zaya is quite a decent lane, although we have Kalista on the other side, so I would say that Kalista Senna is the stronger lane. Despite that, I actually think that FlyQuest should swap in this situation as well. And the reason why I think that is because if we look at the top matchup, I think that Rumble versus Cassante is very, very difficult for the Cassante, and the Rumble should be able to bully him out of lane and get a pretty decent lead. But Rumble is not the type of champion at all that you pick if you want to get into a lane swap situation with the other team, because if Rumble is stuck in a 2v1, he is going to fall really far behind. Why? Because Cassante is a tank that relies on low economy as a top laner, whereas Rumble needs a lot of gold for his AP items, otherwise he's pretty useless. So whereas Cassante is fine with falling far behind, if Rumble falls the same amount behind, it's going to be way worse for Team Liquid. So I would have actually liked to see them lane swap. And while in theory it is a nice lane because you have the Kalista and Senna should be, a good matchup as a range support, it's not really that simple and straightforward, because actually playing the range support matchup against a champion like Xayah Rakan or a bot lane like Xayah Rakan is actually quite difficult, because while you should win, if you make any small little mistake, if you ever allow Rakan to gap close on you, if you ever mess up your spacing, it is very easy to misplay this lane and throw it, whereas you get a guaranteed very positive lead and play for your team by swapping against the Rumble and putting the Rumble behind. So I actually don't like that they don't swap here. And look at exactly what I just said happens. If you don't space perfectly, you have to blow flash, and now all of a sudden they're getting ganked by Nocturne, and they're probably just going to die here. And so again, while the matchup is good, once that pressure comes, once that pressure's on, once the jungler's strong siding the Rakan becomes much stronger, because even though Senna should be able to get priority, what do you do with that priority? What does the priority mean or actually do for you if you're just shoving and then getting ganked because you're overextended? What matters is that Rakan is able to lose gracefully for the first couple of waves, but then he's able to find and engage that blows summoner spells, because he's actually a lot more threatening of a champion. And while Kalista is a very strong aggressive AD carry, like we talked about, Kalista is also not really that good of a pair with Senna, because Kalista wants that Leona or that engaged support that can enable her to all in the same way that a Draven would, like we talked about. And then here's the other issue. Like I just said, you have to, if you're going to play out this 2v2 matchup, you have to be very proficient if you're the range support, in this case Busio on Senna. But as I've said, and it's nothing super harsh against him, I'm the same way. Most support players, most good high elo support players, are mostly playing engaged support champions, especially in this meta where they're good. And so not a lot of us can pilot these champions like Senna support that well. And it's the reason why, a player like Keria, who can pilot both those engaged tank champions really well and has mastered the Senna, the Renata, and even things like that maybe aren't being played as much right now, but other things like Ashe support and stuff like that. That's one of the things that makes him such a great support player. And to be honest, when it comes to Busio, it just seems like over and over again when I watch him making these errors when he's playing Renata, when he's playing Senna, that he just isn't as comfortable and doesn't have as much champion mastery on these champions as he does when he's playing the Leona and when he's playing the Rel. But even more so than the Rel, the Leona in particular, he seems very, very comfortable making aggressive plays on the champion, and he often is actually actively contributing very positively to his team. Whereas when I see him on the Senna, he's making the mistake that makes this matchup not so good. Again, when they could have just lane swapped and put the Rumble behind, now they're actually just shoving into a gank, and they're not actually playing for the priority that they've gotten from their bot lane. There's no plan on what to do with the shoving wave or the priority that they've gotten. Now here we've got a situation where, because we've got the 1v1 in the top lane, we've got this dive situation on Bwipo again. And they're able to just get away with that here. So again, another situation where FlyQuest has kind of allowed and enabled a dive, and it happens right again to him when he gets back into lane. So it's really rough. Even against a team like Team Liquid, they're getting rolled in the early game because their rotations, their decision on when to lane swap and when not to lane swap, and their mechanics when they're forced into champions like Senna and Renata instead of the Leona and the Rel, it's just bad. And Bwipo dies a lot, and a lot of it is due to dives, a lot of it is due to not having any support and jungle help when these situations are occurring. There's a lot of things that are going into it. To read deeper into it, we probably need to look at the full VODs, but obviously that would take a lot of time on this many games. It's just sad is all it is, because you see it no matter what opponent they're playing against, no matter how weak or how strong, they're just giving up way too many free plays early. And if they just cleaned up these plays, and they don't even have to be perfect, right? They don't have a lot of time. Even if they just halved the number of these terrible plays that they're giving up in the early game by doing some VOD review and understanding what's going wrong in these situations, and whether the support needs to be rotating up to cover some of these dives, or whether the jungler needs to be there to help with some of these dives, or when they should be initiating or not initiating lane swaps, because I've seen instances where they shouldn't have lane swapped and they lane swapped, instances where they should lane swap and they're not lane swapping. It's the whole, the whole gamut. And so if they just clean these mistakes up, they would actually be so good. And so it's so strange to see a team that was able to take Hanwha Life to 3 very close games. I guess the third game was kind of a blowout, but FlyQuest could have very easily won the first game that they played, like I said, had they not all committed and died late game over Bwipo getting picked in the jungle. If they had just let him die, they wouldn't have lost the game right there, and they were obviously coming back and scaling and much stronger than the other team. So if they had just let him die, they probably would have been fine. And if they had not gotten so far behind in the early game because of all these mistakes they're making every single game, then they also wouldn't have been in a position that was that bad. Here it is again. It's the classic Bwipo all-inning right into the enemy jungler. At least his jungler's here behind him this time. Wow, great Vild. Yeah, they actually should have this. Nope, they don't. Okay. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? And it's like you're playing against Team Liquid and you're down 5-0, 3,000 gold. What do you expect to happen when you play against Hanwha Life, when you play against Genji, when you play against T1, when you play against Bilibili Gaming, when you play against DK, when you play against all these teams that are way better than Team Liquid? They're going to put you in the dirt early game to the point where you could have been 10 years ahead of the other teams in the draft and understanding the meta, and it's still not going to matter for you because you're simply not going to keep yourself relevant in the game long enough to survive to see your team comp and your draft flourish. And so it looks like the issue is that they've got great understanding of the meta. If their coaching staff in particular is contributing heavily to what they're drafting and the style of play that they've developed, or whether that's a collaboration with the players or mostly the players or whatever, obviously that's very commendable, but there needs to be equal part coaching on focusing on the meta and the drafting and on the actual gameplay itself. Because a lot of teams focus too much on the gameplay, not enough on the drafting, but you don't want to shift the paradigm and then focus too much on the drafting and the meta and not enough on the actual gameplay. Because if you're trying to execute these comps that are great and are very forgiving and allow a Western team to really compete with some of these Korean teams, but you just don't capitalize on it because you have a terrible early game and bad decisions, then it just becomes really sad. Just a wasted opportunity to be ahead of the other teams in the meta. So far, so good. It's just 3-0, very easy, clean early game. And at this point, they have just taken over the early game in this game, and they haven't made these same mistakes. And, look at the result, right? Like, they just have a very free game. And the game is just practically over here because of this situation where they've just managed to get some good ganks off early and they haven't completely trolled like they normally do. And now they just won. And another weird innovative pick here with the Galio top. Look, and just like that, they snowball a game like normal where they actually just get ahead early, just because they have good scaling comps doesn't necessarily, it can mean sometimes, but doesn't necessarily mean that they're that much weaker early and that they have to get really far behind early, because that's the nature of how the comp is going to play out. Hopefully you can see from this video that a lot of the mistakes that they're making don't really have to do with draft, but have to do with their early game rotations, decision to lane swap, and just general matchup, gameplay. And I think in particular their ability to play around people missing on the map, which is just really basic League. And so if they can clean these things up, they're just going to be a really strong team, because obviously we can see that they're ahead in the meta, they're ahead on draft. Can we please just clean up the early game so that we win games like this, or we at least just stay even and then win the games that we've been coming back with our comp, instead of putting ourselves in a situation where we're just way too far behind to come back. Because if this team was never, I'm telling you this, and it sounds, it just sounds too good to be true, but this team would have like a 10-20% chance of winning the world championship if they never had a single game where they, if they had showed up to this Worlds, but even now, but if they had showed up to this Worlds and never had a single game where they were down more than like 3,000 or 4,000 gold at, like 15-20 minutes, this team would have maybe dropped like a couple of games and had a very, very good shot at doing well and winning Worlds. It's just sad to see. So, that's what it is. They're playing against Genji tomorrow at 7 a.m. So we'll see how that goes. Until then, good luck to FlyQuest. They're going to need it against Genji. Hopefully their coaches have identified the same things that I've been ranting about here. And hopefully we see a much cleaner early game from FlyQuest tomorrow. Good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day.